Hello and welcome to this second part of sculpting a head in clay. This time around I'm going to be making more of a stout round man just to contrast the slim long profile of the first bust that we made. The techniques I'm using are pretty much the same as before. The most important thing you could get from this is how crucial the initial shape of the skull is to determining the final shape of your sculpt. So just like last time, we're going to start blocking in the cranium by making kind of an egg shape. And then at that narrow end of the egg shape, just slap on a piece of clay to represent the face, and that'll get refined later. This guy is going to be super round and stubby, so it might be hard to see what I'm adding in. It's all just going to look like a round ball right now, but that's kind of the look I'm going for this guy. Just a heads up, I won't be talking as in depth as I did in the first video. I don't want to repeat myself too much and, make you guys sick of my old anecdote about how building a head is like building a house. So I'll spare you guys that and just talk when something important comes up. So that's looking fine for the head for now. He's looking sufficiently round. I'm going to make a little cylinder here to plug in as a neck. Nothing too fancy, it's just a tube just to mush it in. Now I'm going to chuck on some shoulders so we can stand him straight up. He's going to be wearing a suit, so I'm not going to focus too much on putting on like a actual muscles on him. Plus, he doesn't have any muscles to speak of, this guy. I'm not going to worry too much about mounting him to a board or anything like that. I'm still not sure how much of a chest I want this guy to have, so I'd rather just have the freedom to work without any restrictions, and then when I figure out his exact size, then I'll plug him into something. You may find sculpting chubbier people or even old folks a little bit more forgiving if you're first starting out. Any part that's not working, you can just add a lump of fat or wrinkle here and there to cover it up. You don't really need to worry about musculature and subtle forms like you would, say, a beautiful woman or a ripped superhero. Just using my thumbs to indent some temples there, using your hands, as much as possible, and then when need be, moving on to the rake tool. You'll find after sculpting for a while, your thumbs will get pretty tough. You'll get very manly thumbs after this. I really want him to have almost no chin whatsoever, so I'm going to add in a bit more clay under him just to blend his chin right into his neck and make it almost disappear. You can start to see now, even with just the face, the cranium, and the neck blocked in, that his stubby sort of stature is already coming across. You really want to make sure that you get as much of the sculpt's proportions and characters established before you start on the eyes and the mouth and the smaller details. A great example of why this is important is if you, say, recognize any celebrities in a magazine, even if the pictures are really small and most of the features are hidden in the shadows, somehow our brains recognize who they are. Sometimes I'll even recognize somebody just by seeing their forehead. So it just goes to show just how important these big shapes are. For the ears, I'm just going to squish up some circles of clay and smush them into the sides of the head. A good rule of placing them is to measure halfway between the front of the face and the back of the head, and they'll go right in the middle there. So once those are on, I'm going to measure some guidelines to indicate the center of the face and the position of the eyes. It's really helpful to use some calipers if you have some to make sure that your measurements are correct. With that eye line established halfway between the chin and the top of the head, I'm going to add another small line above it to indicate the top of the eye sockets. And then another one in between that to indicate where the bottom of the nose is going to be. With those basic measurements in, we can start carving out some of the eye sockets. Try and make sure they're pretty deep as you're going to be putting in eyeballs later. And if they're too shallow, your sculpt can look bug-eyed. Next up are some cheekbones, which are going to go right under the sockets and extend to the middle of the ear. When you're putting on the clay, you really only need to eyeball the amounts that you use and pull off the extra clay with your thumb as you lay it down. So for those cheekbones, I didn't try and mold the perfect shape. I just smushed a general amount on to get it just blocked in, and then I'm going to refine it in the next step. For the rest of this next bit, I'm just going to refine those basic shapes and put in like his brow bone and just make sure all the shapes are starting to get in the right direction there before moving on to like the nose or the mouth or anything. Those eye sockets are looking a little too shallow, so I'm going to carve them out some more. If you go too deep, that's totally fine. You're going to need to melt in some clay anyways to put in the back there so the eyeballs can attach in without falling out. All right, let's put a nose on this guy. Just a simple triangle. You don't need to model, the perfect shape of a nose just yet, because the nose has different, anatomy parts to it as well, like those little alar cartilages on the end there. So right now it's just going to be a triangle, and then two little teardrop shapes on the end of it to give him that kind of rounded end to the nose, and then just kind of slopping in, blocking in some nostrils there. And you're kind of building it up piece by piece. These little loop tools with the wooden ends to them, they're really helpful. If you want to get your hands on them, check out Kemper Tools online, and they've got a ton of great sculpting tools. I find just regular art stores, they just don't carry that great selection of sculpting tools. A lot of them are just little plastic, crappy little things. So sometimes you need to go online to get better stuff. Starting to block out the mouth now. It's just a barrel shape, kind of indicating that there's teeth underneath, pushing everything out. And get that firmly on there with the tool. So I've just drawn a line down the middle of that barrel shape, and it kind of stops if you can imagine drawing a straight line down from the iris, and that would indicate where the corners of the mouth are. And a skeleton has appeared in the background there. With that line drawn in, I'll start shaping those lips with the wood tool by pushing up the top lips a bit and starting to add in a bit of clay to give them I want them to have quite big lips. Okay, I'm happy enough now with the general shape of this guy, so we can plug him on his ghetto little base there with the two nails sticking out. Just like that first bust, you melt the bottom of the clay and plug him in, and when it dries, or sorry, cools, it'll just cling to those nails really nicely. I like putting them on at kind of a diagonal angle. It just feels a bit more dynamic to me. Gonna give him a little bit more of a body there. I find it sometimes looks a bit weird if it's literally just a head sticking out of the board. So I'm gonna try and give him a bit more of a chest just by melting some clay and then slopping that on and painting it on. Now onto the eyeballs. It's the same technique as in the other videos. It's rolling up two little balls and hitting them a bit with that freeze spray so that they don't deform. And then melting kind of a little bit of the inside of the eye socket so that when you plug them in, they're going to stick well enough. He's going to have kind of bulgy eyes, so I don't mind that they're sticking out a bit. With those in there, I'm going to grab my ball stylus tool and give him some pupils. If you don't have that kind of tool, tons of stuff will work. You could grab the end of a pencil or a pen. Anything will do. Just make some dots in there. I don't usually do this on small sculpts, but some sculptors do a really cool thing where they kind of add in a little bit of clay in the middle of the pupil there, and it fakes kind of the glint in the eye, which is a really neat little trick to do. I find with things this small, it just doesn't look quite right. Next up is his little eyelids there. It's just a small, thin roll of clay, and you lay those on right under the pupil. It's important to note, by the way, that when you are adding in his pupils, this is the part where it's going to determine the directions he's looking. So don't put the pupils on totally facing forward unless that's the look you're going for. And now we're putting on the top ones there and just adding in little tear ducts with that ball stylus tool and kind of pushing it into place as delicately as possible. Once you've got those eyelids on, there's kind of a teardrop shaped gland that just goes between them and the eyebrow. And once you get that in there, it'll kind of blend everything together and make him look a lot less bug-eyed. I'm kind of going for a concerned, worried look about this guy. I'm thinking his backstory is his name is Parmjeet, and he's on his first date. And he sees her coming down the street, so he's a little bit nervous, but he's also pretty excited. Now for a couple little bags under his eyes there, and just like those two top glands, it kind of blends into the cheekbones there, and makes a nice transition for the eye. Sometimes you'll have to go back into the eyelids and make sure they're an even thickness. When you first press them on, it can really wobble them up and make them uneven. So I'm just going in here and making sure they've got a consistent thickness. Moving on to the ears now. It really is all about just carving out a hollow into that blockout shape you have and then filling up that concave shape with stripes of clay to represent all the little folds and kind of echo chambers of the ear. I find ears actually kind of fun and forgiving to work on because even though they're made up all these tiny little finicky rolls and stuff, they don't need to emote that much like the eyes do. So as long as you know the basic shapes and more or less where they need to go in the ear, um, they're pretty simple to do. And remember, if things are getting too muddy on you and everything's starting to look kind of nonsensical, hit it with that free spray just to harden everything up. And you have a lot more control out of the clay. For these little sections like these ears and maybe the underside of the nose, it just won't look good until you start smoothing it down and you get rid of all the kind of junky bits with your acid brush, and then you're able to make sense of all the shapes. So don't worry if it looks a little too messy at this point. Once you start scrubbing it down, it'll all kind of come together on you. Okay, it's time to give this guy his little haircut. I'm thinking it's going to be pretty short on the sides and kind of businessman-like since he's out on a date. So it's all about just laying out pretty large-sized chunks. Not just going in with a little tiny tool and just drawing in little strands of hair. You really want to get the feeling that there's some volume, no matter what kind of the haircut. Here I'm drawing some boundary lines indicating where the hairline stops, and then I'll fill it in with little blobs of clay for the sides. As junky as the hair looks right now with all these segmented chunks, Once it gets smoothed down with the solvents, everything's just going to jibe together. The same thing will happen with all the little pieces we put in for the ear. That's about it for the hair. For this next little while, I'm going to go into all the features across the board and refine them, taking off and adding on wherever needed. So I'm just going to speed this video up a bit since those tiny changes can be a bit hard to see. While this is just getting cleaned up, let me hop onto my soapbox and rant for a bit. One thing that I'm finding really cool about working in clay is it's really an indication of what you can accomplish in craft just with your hands. I'm finding in my industry in games that programs are starting to replace anything sculpture related, at least for character art. So you've got stuff now like Marvelous Designer for doing clothes, head scans for doing the faces, programs like Substance Painter that procedurally texture your model. So it's really getting hard to tell what's been made by the artist and what's been simmed in a program. This is no slight against using programs like that, and you really have to know what you're doing to get a good result out of them. But I'm finding there's something refreshingly simple and transparent about things made the old way. Plus, you don't need to go out and drop a ton of cash on like a nice computer and programs. You just need a $12 block of clay, a couple wood tools, and you're off to the races. Okay, I'll start putting some clothes on him now. I pretty much roll up thin tubes of clay and kind of block out the outline of where I want the clothes to be, and then I'll just fill in those outlines with clay. So here I'm doing that for the collar. He's going to be wearing a little dress shirt and just a suit. I'm kind of happy that he's just going to be having a suit, not too many complex wrinkles or anything like that. So we're going to keep it very simple. And sometimes that's a good look for a bust. You know, a lot of the great busts have just amazing faces, and they keep the body quite simple, and the focus is all on the face. To smooth him out after raking him down, I'm going to go pretty heavy on the Taltine. He doesn't have any small intricate details and his features are really round, so I can go pretty heavy-handed scrubbing the surface down. It'll just go a lot quicker. If you're working on a lot smaller details like little toes, or if you've done tons of little skin details and you've hand drawn in wrinkles, you definitely wouldn't want to use a lot of this stuff. You can really see here, even on the rag, that it's actually turning it into mud. It's great for smoothing out the large surfaces, but it would absolutely eradicate any smaller details. With that all wiped down and just totally loaded with solvent, I'm going to put it by the fan and blow that stuff off and let it evaporate a little bit. And once that's done, I'm going to pose his head just slightly. So just literally grabbing it and angling it in whatever direction you'd like. Don't be scared about breaking anything. As you can see here, the head's coming right off. That's fine. I mean, it's clay, so you'll just be able to melt it back on and smooth out the seam. So be confident and experiment around and just find something, a little pose that you like. If for some reason the head does keep falling off on you and it's getting kind of annoying, feel free to just take like a 2-inch piece of thicker armature wire and plug it in the part where it's falling off, like in the neck, and then put the head right on that, like a head on a stick, and that'll just put it right in place, and you shouldn't have any more problems with it. This guy doesn't really need that since his neck's pretty thick. So here I'm filling up that big gap, that seam in his neck, with some melted clay and then blending it back in with the Taltine, and it should just disappear. You can start to see that after the smoothing, some parts are looking pretty soft. Like his shirt should have a bit of a sharpness to it on the edges. His ears, even though they're nice and smooth now, they don't have too much form to them anymore. So this is the part where you need to go back in and selectively tighten up areas. So I'm going to go back into the shirt and chop off little bits of clay just to sharpen it up. Going back in with the loop tool here in the hair and adding in little hair strands and stuff like that. It's adding in that last little bits of detail that'll pull it all together. Here's that technique I showed in my other video on how to sculpt a bust, where you lay some saran wrap or like some Ziploc bag on the surface and draw into it. You can do this for little hair strands or putting on pores. It just creates a softer effect. He's going to have kind of thin, wispy eyebrows, not too thick. You can also use this to go in and re-emphasize seam lines and just sharpen the details across the board. It's good to use this for the hair as well. If you do want to go in and add in individual strands, same thing, the softer effect. It's just less jarring. You get less bottled up clay, little balls and stuff. It just keeps things cleaner. Starting to use it now to put in some more pores. You really want to go as light and subtle as possible, and probably use as small as tool as you can, especially for the smaller the model. If you go too dense with this, or too deep, it can look pretty cratery. So use with restraint. You'll also want to put it on across the board. If you just put it on in selective areas and you have some blank, completely flat, smooth areas, it can look a little bit off. You might be wondering, how did Parmjeet's date go? Unfortunately, not that well. After a great night out, they ran into one of Parkdale's most violent and notorious residents on the streetcar ride home, Laszlo Toth, who proceeded to expose himself indecently and just ramble incessantly to the couple for like half an hour. Not only did this sour the night, but Parmjeet's date was so unimpressed that he didn't stand up for them that she just didn't want anything to do with him anymore. So he basically just went back home alone, where he lives with his mother. If you're interested in Laszlo Toth's story, by the way, be sure to check out my other tutorial on how to make a character maquette. How's that for absolutely just shameless self-promotion? I feel sick just saying it. Anyways, that's about it for old Parmjeet. I just gave him a little Bluetooth headset. I think he looks quite dashing with it, and now he's off to his ill-fated date. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and got some help out of it. Take care.